Alright, we're back, of course, talking FF7. We're talking Ever Crisis in this video. The game, of course, got an update very recently that added the boy Angeal to the First Soldier story, and I do mean boy specifically because he is very young in the story. He's like 16 years old or something, which is very interesting, very cool. It's cool to see young Angeal, the interactions between young Sephiroth and young Angeal, them meeting for the first time. Kind of a TLDR on Episode 2, Chapter 1, Sephiroth and Angeal go on like a kind of a rescue mission of sorts. There's like 4 soldiers that went missing in the Wutai area. A third person there called Bachman, who's like recording their mission for Shinra, I guess. Kind of an interesting character, I suppose. But they're actually on mission in Wutai in a new location that we never heard of when it comes to the compilation of FF7 called Robio. It's in like the southern tip of the Wutai continent, I suppose. Really quickly, I am using Faz Faz as like upload of this. They always upload like a playthrough of like the new content every time something comes out for Ever Crisis. It's just more convenient to do that. I don't have a way to record gameplay anyways for Ever Crisis. Big shout out to them. The video, of course, will be linked in the description. Specifically, our group is going to be in the Igara Forbidden Zone, which is kind of interesting. So we have a couple new locations to look forward to potentially for Remake Part 3. Because obviously, when you go back to the original FF7, Wutai's nothing. It's just Wutai, right? It's the continent of Wutai, but there's only that location. That's it. There might be like a cave in the general area. I don't remember that you got to get like a gold chocobo for or some shit. And then you had stuff like, you know, Fort Tamblin with a Crisis Core, right? There's not a whole lot to that continent. They obviously got to flesh it out for Remake Part 3. And now we have some locations that might show up in that game with, you know, Robio and the Igara Forbidden Zone. I suppose it depends on what happens in like the future of the story, right? When we get like the next, you know, episode or whatever, next chapter. I don't know if these locations will still be there. They might get fucking wiped out by Shinra like we've seen in the past. I don't know. Anyways, another TLDR on the events of this like chapter. They come across the bodies. They're all dead except for one at the end. The 4th one they find is alive. They've all been killed by specifically cuts, not by a monster. They've definitely been attacked by like a weapon, a sword. And that's where we get the origins of Sephiroth's weapon. So yeah, they come across an old guy whose name is Masamune. He's a swordsmith, Masamune, whenever they're actually fighting him, and he has Sephiroth's sword that we know him to have these days. And it's his namesake. He named the sword after himself. He does want to pass it on to somebody who's like a strong fighter or warrior or some shit, he says. But he doesn't do that in this episode. I'm assuming that's something that'll happen in like the next update or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of what we have right now. We have, clearly this sword was crafted by this guy. That's why he's Swordsmith Masamune. That's why the sword's named after him. It's a little underwhelming right now just because we don't have the full context of it. We haven't seen how the sword was made. Because I've always talked about on the channel that I wanted, you know, an origin story. Because they've always had this like implication that Sephiroth's sword is like powerful and maybe even magical in nature. This for me goes all the way back to the original PS1 booklet for Final Fantasy VII, where in the part where they talk about Sephiroth, they actually put emphasis on a sword, and it says, his giant sword, which only he can handle, has extremely destructive power. Now, whether or not that description of the sword was meant to imply that it had some sort of magical powers or something, I don't know. I've always taken it that way. That's all it was always implied to me. And I've always wanted an origin story for it ever since like reading the booklet back all the time in the 90s. Always reading those character descriptions of all the party members and shit and Sephiroth. The part where it talks about it being like a giant sword that only he can wield, that's obviously due to the size of it. Like, kind of like Cloud's Buster Sword, right? We've seen other people grab that, but like the fact that the katana is so ridiculously long, like, it makes sense that, you know, only Sephiroth and maybe a few people could actually grab it and use it. But they describe it as also having like extremely destructive power, which to me sounds like it would have abilities or powers or some shit. So to me, I've always just wanted the history of that weapon because it always sounded very intriguing. Similar to like the Buster Sword, right? Like they gave us that a little bit with the original FF7 because you see Zack with like the secret scene pass it on to Cloud, and obviously Crisis Core gave us even more. Zack got it from, you know, Angeal, right? And Angeal got it from his dad. Like there's a whole history to the Buster Sword. I've always wanted like a little bit of history for Sephiroth's iconic weapon as well. Ever Crisis, 27 years later, we finally have some sort of an answer. We don't have the full answer because we don't have the full story yet for the sword, the katana, whatever you want to call it. But it was clearly made by a Wutaian swordsmith. I will say that right now, just on the surface level, without the full story of the history of the katana, it's just slightly underwhelming because I was hoping there'd be more to it in terms of like, I don't know, some sort of magical, powerful sword that was designed by the planet or some shit, right? Something along those lines. And if it's just made by this guy, and he could be like magical in nature too, potentially in the future, I don't know. If it's just made by some like Wutaian swordsmith, it's just like a regular ass katana that's just powerful for some reason, that'd be a little underwhelming, so I'm hoping they give us more to it, and I think there will be. I say that because, for one, we're obviously going to get more to the character of Masamune and the sword itself in the future, obviously. But there's also the character Alissa, the surviving character that they find in, you know, the Forbidden Zone. There's definitely some unique shit going on there. We'll talk about that in just a minute as well. But there's like a clip you see at the beginning of like the new chapter or whatever, where they're showing some like really good CGI footage or whatever. And she talks about how like as soon as Sephiroth gets that sword, the world will change. So there does seem to be something special about the sword. And I hope it's a good payoff, whatever it might be.
セフィロスがあの刀を手にすれば世界が変わる気がするもの。
世界が変わる
It's actually a kind of cool suggestion I got from somebody on Twitter, because I actually threw out a couple of screenshots from this like story because I thought it was interesting. We're finally getting the origin of the sword, and he mentioned how it was a little underwhelming, and that he was hoping like the sword was crafted from like the meteorite that Jenova crashed on the planet with. And I actually kind of really love that idea that it's made from like a metal that we don't have here on the planet, that they don't have there on Gaia, right? It's some foreign metal from fucking knows where in the cosmos that Jenova came from, right? And then maybe also because it's, if it was potentially crafted from that meteorite that has maybe a bit of Jenova's DNA, which would explain why it is so powerful. Actually, if you're a Marvel fan, you can look to like vibranium. That's something that like crashed onto the planet Earth, like however long ago in the history of Marvel or whatever. And like they make obviously like some of the strongest weapons with vibranium. So kind of similar to that in a way. I think there's kind of a cool little story there too, where like everything about Sephiroth that's bad is, or powerful is Jenova, right? It's obviously in his DNA from birth, but also the DNA of the weapon that he uses. I don't exactly know like the story, how you get to the point of them crafting a sword from that. Like how did they get the material? Because obviously she crashed on like the North Pole or whatever of the planet. So I don't know how the people in Wutai would have got some of that meteorite metal or whatever, but there's a cool idea there for sure. And I'm kind of curious what the payoff will be in like maybe the next update or whatever of how the sword itself was crafted. I'm also very interested in the character of Masamune because he's pretty powerful and he looks cool as shit. When it loads up the fight for the first time, you get a really good look at the character. Man, he looks cool as fuck. So I do definitely want like a history on him as well as the sword. Yeah, we finally have a part of an answer of the origins of Sephiroth's iconic weapon. It's something I've waited a good portion of my life for, something I've been waiting for since, again, the 90s, right? So we're finally here with it. We don't have the full details yet. It's a little bit, I'm intrigued. I'm also a little underwhelmed depending what the payoff's going to be. It's going to be that conclusion, that like, the payoff of like how this thing was made, how it was crafted, why is it so powerful, that whole story. So I hope that they actually deliver, and I think they will. It remains to be seen, though. As for the character of Alissa, there's obviously something weird going on. When you see her a lot of times, there's like distortion shit, like you see for the trailers for Rebirth a lot of times, like what's going on, is it real, is it not? There's also like purple shit floating around in the air and stuff at times.
Sephiroth があの刀を手にすれば世界が変わる
And as we see here, that same like purple pinkish shit is behind Hojo in this moment, so it's very likely that she's attached to Hojo in some way. Also, she looks like Sephiroth's fucking mother. She looks like Lucrecia, to the point that she even addresses it, because Sephiroth is stunned when he sees her, and he flashes up like a thought of Lucrecia on screen. And then she actually says it. She says, "Do I remind you or look like your sweetheart or something like that, or do I look like your mother?" Especially the last bit there, that's a very oddly specific thing to say. Somebody's staring at you. For one, it's even weird that you'd say, like, do I look like your girlfriend or your sweetheart or whatever? Like, that's just a weird thing to say in general. But also, to further go, do I look like your mother? When clearly, obviously, she does. She does look like Lucrecia. So I think, given that she does look like Sephiroth's mom, that you have all, like, kind of, like, distortion shit in a lot of the scenes that she's involved in, the sinister looks she gives at times, and then also, like, the purple, pinkish shit that's floating around her that's also behind Hojo. There's got to be some sort of payoff of that, of, like, something to do with Hojo, whether she's a creation of Hojo, a clone of his mother, Jenova shit potentially, or whatever, like some sort of maybe like manipulation type shit. Which does make sense for the character of Hojo, of course. He loves to experiment and do all kinds of stuff, and he obviously, Sephiroth is his son, his biological son, right? And it was a creation of his in a sense as well, in terms of like obviously conceiving the child, but also experimenting on it when it's in the womb of Lucrecia. But I could see him also wanting to manipulate and obviously control Sephiroth. That's like the whole point. Sephiroth's the strongest thing in the world, essentially, right? Because Sephiroth in Ever Crisis, we learn, does like know about his mother. He thinks her name is Jenova, but he does have like a picture of Lucrecia. So I could see, Hojo creating something that looks like Lucrecia just to like somehow manipulate Sephiroth to what end, I don't know. That's really kind of it for now. There is some additional scenes once you finish like the story of this chapter where you get to see like Bachman kind of talking about Sephiroth and like his power and his strength and everything like that. And then you have like Sephiroth having, I think, like a dream where he's talking to Lucrecia, again, named Jenova. But I don't know if it's meant to be like a real dream he's having at any particular time, or like a memory or something, or if it's some manipulation from Hojo and or Jenova, because there's like the purple shit around the screen. And also, whenever the other scene is like Angeal, like some past stuff with him, like telling his parents he's joining Soldier. But it's also the purple shit around the screen or whatever, pinkish purple shit, whatever the color is. Fuck. So I don't know what's like technically real. I assume, at least in Angeal's case, that it's at least an actual memory of him telling his parents that he's going to join Soldier, right? But then that would mean that the color on the outside doesn't mean anything. But it's also like a similar color to what we're seeing around Alissa and around Hojo or whatever in the cutscenes that we looked at and shit. So I feel like there's a purpose to it, but if it is just a memory thing, then maybe that's an actual interaction that Sephiroth had with his mother at some point. Anyways, that's pretty much the video, my dudes. I just want to kind of cover this, talk about it. We've done like an Ever Crisis video in a while, and especially I haven't been like this in depth with Ever Crisis. Obviously, the game itself is kind of fun to play, but there's not a whole lot to talk about outside of the First Soldier stuff, because that's the new stuff. That's what's exciting. So we're definitely looking forward to like the next update, you know, episode 2 of this chapter or whatever, to see what we get more on like the character of Masamune, the sword itself, the character of Alissa, kind of what's going on there. Definitely be here to talk about it with the next update for sure. Anyways, that's the video, my dudes. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. There's no in the description below. Follow me on ffvii. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame, we blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.